Hey, y'all.
So I don't see anything listed under topics. Should I do
I
people
added-
have things to talk about?
There's agenda items, but they were from last time. Because last time we didn't have a meeting.
So you want me to just carry forward the topics from last time?
Yeah.
Okay. Derp. Oh, big grief. I swear I'm not going to do this.
I don't know if we'll have critical mass though.
Well, we can always try.
There's Brendan.
I am very surprised given that this is day 3 of build.
How's build going? Or is this your excuse to not be there right now? No, no, important committee business.
Brendan, don't you have a talk today? Around this time?
Turns out we're all on stage right now.
Brendan's
Lots of transparency.
entitled, a look at Kubernetes from the inside.
Whoa, nice stormtrooper helmet there, Tim.
What Stormtrooper helmet? It's Darth Vader. Oh, wait, no, it's Stormtrooper.
And we're starting to actually get critical mass. Sweet.
All right, I have volunteered to be note taker for this. I think we're about as quorum as we're going to get if somebody else wants to be bosun.
I'm happy to try and keep us on task.
Here we go.
All right, so the first topic is CNCF Governance Board meeting items from Michelle, licensing blacklist, allow versus disallow list proposal. We'll send out slides.
Yeah, I didn't do that. That got voted on. That got voted on. Basically, the CNCF has to approve like all of the licenses for projects in the CNCF and their dependencies. So the projects have dependencies and their licenses should also be in compliance. And so instead of having to do that manually one by one, they just want like a blanket approval and disallow list. That got voted on. I think there was a yay all around. So no objections to that. That got passed. And so that's not to say like if you're not on the whitelist that you don't, you can't be like an approved license. It just means you have to go through the manual process. So.
Yeah, I think the bigger problem is the lack of continuous automated enforcement. They run projects through Fossology or something like that on a by request basis, which usually they only do when projects are first inducted into CNCF. So we actually, SIG testing folks were working on automating the license verification. It turns out to be kind of tricky because most, other than the Apache licenses don't say what they are. So you actually have to pattern match the text.
As one of the few people who reviews the licenses file in the repo, that problem, I can now pattern match most of them by site.
Yeah, well, automating it, it turned out there were like, I don't know, 80 different versions or something of just, the handful that are actually supported. We also have a bunch of third-party code that doesn't also import the license files. So that needs to be fixed. We there's an issue filed on steering from Chris Anishizek, I believe, with a list of things that were believed to not actually meet the requirements. One of them, the rate limiter library, has been fixed, I think twice. It was fixed and unfixed and refixed. But most of the rest
means removed from the project and then it got re-added?
Yes.
Is that the Juju rate limiter one?
Yes.
Wasn't that LGPL with the static linking exception? We have a bunch of those, and they were deemed okay at some point.
Yeah, they were long ago. I remember when we did that, like the legal.
I remember this firing.
Yeah, I remember too. But they're hard to pattern match because it's some like random string that Ubuntu put in the front of the LGPL or something like that.
Yeah.
So I know there are a couple of us here who were also at the Open Source Leadership Summit, and I felt like automated compliance verification was a repeated topic at many talks there, many of which I did not attend. Does anybody know if the talks were recorded in any way, shape, or form, or could we reach out to that community of folks to see if we're not duplicating effort?
I don't know if all of the talks were recorded. I don't actually think they were.
Yeah, I think they're not.
But I mean, that's definitely, it is a wheel many people have worked on. I hope we're not reinventing it. Like, I'm hoping we've actually looked at some of the prior art out there. That's all. I personally, as a SIG testing person, haven't seen a proposal come across our mailing list about this. That's why I bring it up. Usually document prior art and stuff.
Well, yeah, it went through contributor experience.
So are there action items that we want to take from this conversation or take?
Well, we should probably, so the PR from Ryan is still open, and I don't know if there's art other than FOSSA.
For context, what is this PR from Ryan? I kind of missed that.
It is 62088. Let me find the right window to put it in the Zoom chat. Is that what?
But just like, was this something that addresses one of the licensing concerns?
It's the thing that tries to pattern match all the acceptable licenses.
Okay, I see. So this is SIG testing's effort. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and whether it's SIG testing or contributor experience or whatever is, and the original issue was CC to contributor experience for whatever that's worth. But yeah, Ryan usually is more involved in testing.
Okay.
So two things is that number one, this feels like this should be something that should be a pre-submit check that we can actually make on every single.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be pre-submit. It can just run as a test. Like, we're trying to not actually add more pre-submit scripts.
Like, implement it as a unit test is what Brian is saying.
Implement it as a unit test.
Totally could work, I think, except for, isn't the license extraction, doesn't that require GoDeps?
Well, the thing that I'm worried about is that, like, as we look at associated projects and stuff like that, we have the CLA bot that actually approves stuff. There should be a license checker that's part of that also, right? Because otherwise this stuff will just drift.
Right.
Yeah, and honestly, like the Kubernetes repo, we have machinery in place that scrubs through all of the vendor directory, finds license files. If they're not checked in, it actually goes to the Git repo and crawls up the tree until it finds a license or copyright file, copies all of those into a single place so that when somebody sends a change to vendors, there's one file that I personally flag. If that file ever changes, it needs special review. That was a requirement by Google Legal early on. And in fact, I think that licenses file is distributed as part of our tarball. And that was also a requirement from Google Legal. I don't know if CNCF holds a different position than Google Legal on that, but I know that none of the other repos do that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking this seems like a CNCF-wide thing, not a Kubernetes thing.
Agreed.
Yeah, I don't remember if we previously filed a service desk issue on this. I may have, but we certainly could. Basically, after Chris filed an issue, I basically said this is impossible without automated enforcement.
Do we know how other projects have handled this? Have other projects handled this?
No, other projects have not handled this. Not CNCF projects, anyway.
If there is still a bucket of money, this certainly seems a bucket of money for discrete tasks that the CNCF can farm out to contractors. This seems like one of them. Yes,
there is. I mean, it looked like something was going to happen, so that may have forestalled separate effort, but it looks like Ryan's PR has been stalled for quite a while.
Is there something I should take back to the CNCF and ask or request?
Well, we should probably just have someone on the steering committee owning it and following up and making sure something gets done, and then we can decide whether to finish Ryan's PR or to file a service desk request to ask the CNCF to do it.
I don't know what Ryan's PR is, but if you send me the link, I guess
it's in the notes.
Okay, since I've been dealing so much with it, I guess it makes sense that I would follow through.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree that the CNCF has money and would be willing to put money into it if we told them we weren't going to solve it ourselves.
So much money, y'all. So much money.
That's a different
There are
discussion.
over 200 members now, right?
The CNCF has more money than it knows what to do with at this point.
Yes.
So whatever
But yet, please buy a diamond sponsorship to KubeCon North America.
Steering committee as a paid position?
Okay, so I just, I wanted to bring up the whitelist, blacklist thing because it seemed like that's something from the meeting that's relevant, or that's something that we might want to know about. Going forward, I was thinking, would it be helpful if I sent out a summary of stuff that happened at the governing board meeting on our steering private list? Is that something we're interested in? Okay.
I think that would be useful because they don't send out any official notes, even though I've asked them many times for this. I think it's not cool for it to be so opaque, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess on the steering private list, the only I can send out some notes and relevant things and relevant slides. For example, the majority of the last meeting was it was just going through the marketing plan for the next year. So if we had suggestions as the steering committee on, asks or requests and feedback there, then I think they'd appreciate it. I gave them my thoughts, but I'm sure that everybody else has thoughts too. So I'll send out the relevant information and start doing summaries, and we'll see how that goes.
So on the licensing thing, sorry, Michelle, it sounds great.
No problem.
Does anybody have marketing stuff before I bring us back to licensing? Sorry.
We can continue that on.
I'm working through my thoughts here. I apologize.
I just want to say I've seen the marketing deck due to my other CNCF hat, and it's a huge step forward compared to last year.
I don't know. There was one slide that had solution 3 times in one sentence.
It's not perfect for sure, but it's so much better than what they were discussing last year.
And they're so open to feedback, so I'm sure it's.
So on the licensing thing, I'm just trying to think what concretely can we do to actually sort of, I agree that automation is really the right way to go here. Could we do a better job of evangelizing to folks that they have to take this stuff seriously? Could we write it down someplace in terms of where we say how to add a dependency and make sure that it's the list is linked there? Could we, when we find that bad dependencies get added, take somebody, aside and say, hey, you didn't follow this process. You got to clean up this mess. I mean, I feel like there's things we can do to actually start, because I'm looking at, say, I just looked at the Eclipse Foundation as an example, and it doesn't look like they have automation, but they definitely have some clear guidelines that are on a website that obviously their maintainers are aware of.
So I do think contributor experience might be the right place to talk about this and make sure that it's in the contributor guide and the developer guide that they're working on going forward. I've attended the past couple of their meetings, and I don't recall hearing about this license thing. So I can make sure that it's raised, visibility.
Yeah, this is an fairly old issue. It's not a recent thing. It's been ongoing for eons.
Yeah, and concretely, I guess what I'd like to see is if CNCF holds a legal position on what makes for good licensing, and maybe even that we go back to our definition of associated repos and say, not only do you have to sign the CNCF CLA, but you need to ensure that you're following these licensing. And here's a script. If you're using Go programs, if you're writing Go code, here's a script that you can run as part of your CI, which will verify all the licenses of your dependencies transitively. Yeah. And we strongly urge any project that considers itself to be associated to run this script.
Yeah, the associated repos just require the Apache license, but it doesn't mention dependencies.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree with what Joe said, but as far relying on human effort with a project of our scale has just proven impossible. Like, we have way too much churn in people involved, and the guidelines also change over time, and people never go reread them. So
I don't disagree, but it's not top of mind for folks. It's not something that people are thinking about as they add dependencies. So I feel like we can do some education here that this is something that folks should be aware of, that it's not a free-for-all in terms of adding whatever code they find random out on the internet into the code base, right?
Yeah. Yes, and we definitely should have documentation, and we should have a clear policy. It will probably require email to Kubernetes dev or something to make people aware of it, at least initially, but that'll just be a point in time. Like, the people who join the week after that won't know about it.
So I can take an action item to go bump this in visibility and priority for contributor experience. I'm sure this is something that Tim Pepper probably has some significant experience with and could ride a little bit more. If you're talking about educating people, they're definitely the group that kind of does that, and we can make sure that broadcasting to Kubernetes dev, maybe talking about it in a community meeting, making sure it's documented. That's all their deal.
We can do like, what is it, at all on Slack? That'll totally solve the problem.
We have more than twice as many contributors now as when Slack participants as when I did that.
Let's just schedule a game. Slack game day. We'll just let them know 5 minutes before we do it.
All right, so how about time boxes? We spent 20 minutes on that bullet point. Anything else on the governance board meeting stuff, Michelle?
Oh, sorry, just one last comment on the licensing stuff. I believe the CNCF actually has quite active stuff around automated license management, and I don't know the details, but I remember going to a speech once where they described like annotating licenses with metadata and automatically, verifying various things. Might be worth just having a quick look at seeing what they can do there for us.
Well, I already asked Chris about this, and he didn't mention anything other than FOSSA. So,
okay. I mean, if we have covered that base, that's fine. I thought that they actually had plans to provide like material support in this space of automated license verification stuff.
If they do, Chris doesn't know about it.
I can double check. I think that's the direction that they're headed in. So I can double check.
Okay, so the next topic is various governance clarifications PR. So this was Tim and Phil.
Oh.
So Tim?
That's
Tim. So there were a couple of folks who had questions, comments, complaints, concerns about the process for filing their charter. And I know that Phil had done a PR in the meantime regarding updating the comments of what the process is. And I just think we need to start evangelizing and making sure that it's clear for folks who are submitting charters what the expectations are and how the process should work.
Yeah, and that was actually my pull request, which I started before I went on vacation, and then it got hung up. I think there's another issue here is where as we do this stuff in the open, that's one thing, but we need to find a way to close on this stuff amongst ourselves, because like otherwise it's so hard to get this stuff in.
Well, so one thing we had talked about doing is getting half a dozen charters and looking at all of them and deciding what we like and don't like, and then agreeing on some good examples for other people to follow before we really press on asking the other SIGs to move forward with their charters. There are half a dozen-ish that are in progress now. So we could actually do that. I provided feedback to the SIG apps one. I put some effort into the SIG architecture one. I read the SIG scalability one at some point. There's also one from Signode, which Derek created, I believe. Contributor experience actually already merged theirs.
All right, so it seems like we want to beta test the process, but even to beta test the process, we need some sort of process that is at least a spitball at this stuff more than we have now. Because we have the example charters, which is one thing, but then there's also the process of like, how do you go about getting reviews? When is it done? Who do you talk to? How do you close this out in a timely manner? And I feel like we don't have a lot of clarity around that. This particular, go ahead.
Oh, it's, I mean, we did have the spreadsheet where we assigned every SIG a couple of steering committee members to help them with the process. So I've been doing, the ones I signed up for.
But like, I guess the question is that like, how do we get to the point like where is there a vote? Is there consensus amongst the steering committee members? When is a vote called? Like, I think we just need to have some of that stuff nailed down because, I think these things get started and then there ends up being a like, well, what next? And even amongst the steering committee, I don't think we're all on the same page in terms of what next to actually get these things closed and merged.
My suggestion would be that we hold ourselves to a deadline. I think that I feel like we were discussing the same thing when we came up with, let's look at the 6 examples, and we had supposedly set ourselves the deadline of next meeting, we'll actually present the 6 charters so we collectively get an agreement on what a good charter looks like, right? And then we never did that. I feel like we kind of owe it to ourselves to circulate through the group what actually looks good. So could we hold ourselves to a deadline this time?
So like say the deadline's like in 2 weeks, the next meeting, like do we just come back to this meeting and like we vote and like if it's majority yay, then it's in?
Why don't we do a subgroup again, like we've done for other things? So a subgroup can like take initiative and go forth and, come up with at least the TLDR for the rest of the folks to process.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like I'm not so much talking about the meta process that Joe seems to be concerned with here. I wasn't sure if we had reached consensus on what like a good quality versus poor quality charter is. And that's what I thought we were trying to accomplish here. So my suggestion would be of the 6 charters that have been put forth using the spreadsheet where we have steering committees assigned to those SIGs and their charters, those folks should help hold themselves accountable to actually, highlight what's working, what's not working in those charters. And
actually, I also found that trying to write a charter from the template was instructive because there were things that became clear that the template didn't cover it all or didn't cover in the right amount of detail or was worded oddly, things like that. So I want to feed those back into the template, although I haven't done that yet.
And so I don't know, my thought was if this is the sort of thing where we want to come to a consensus and we don't necessarily want to show that sausage being made, we could share our comments privately and then sort of reflect on this at the next meeting, or we can share it on an ongoing basis on the public mailing list. But I feel like this is one of those things we could really do offline via mailing list threads and then just sort of circle back at the next meeting. And then having gotten that consensus at the next meeting, we can move forward with the rest. And I think, Joe, perhaps if you want to put together the framework for that meta process of like, who should they contact? Who are the reviewers? We can have a straw man of that by next meeting as well.
Yeah, is that public? Sorry, actually one thing before that. Aaron, that makes a lot of sense. I did not know that was the process that you were talking about. Yes, I love that. Let's do that. And by let's do that, I mean, I vote for like, let's talk about this privately on the steering private list and kind of keep our comments to ourselves. The other thing was, actually, I forgot my other comment now. Darn.
I usually get uppity when it's about like backroom conversations. The reason I want to have it private is I don't want to like call specific people out in public. That's all. When it comes to like what looks good and what doesn't. That's the only.
Especially because it's not their fault because this is all like not like super solid yet. So
or if there are questions about scope of a SIG or things like that might be controversial. So we might want to discuss that in private first. if there are major questions about that.
All right, so I think the first thing we need to do is we need to actually communicate to the rest of the community that we consider the chartering process to be in alpha. And so we're doing it with a couple of early examples so that we can work out bugs. Because I think right now there's a lot of confusion in terms of what should SIGs be doing and giving them the freedom to say, hey, we're still working this stuff out. Does that seem reasonable?
I think I announced that at a community meeting, but an email might reach more people.
Yeah, and we just need to find ways to sort of like, because I think a lot of folks, I see people jumping the gun because they're eager to get this done, which is great. And I feel like we're not ready to really give them the right feedback and vote on it and sort of make it done, you know?
Is that spreadsheet public, the one that maps steering committee members to the SIGs that they're assigned to, they assign themselves to?
It is not posted in a public place, but I think it is publicly viewable.
Okay.
It's not advertised.
Okay.
So I mean, we could advertise it so they know which steering committees to go bug to learn about this stuff. I think that would be a really great bi-directional thing. I just don't know if we're ready for that yet.
Yeah, I thought that was premature given that we haven't even settled on what constitutes a good charter yet.
Fair.
Okay, so the questions we need to answer is, what constitutes a charter? What is the process for proposing a charter and how do we vote on it? And like, you know, how do we close on it? So those, you know, and then communicating what the state of the chartering process is to the rest of the community. That seems to be the things that concretely need to be done here. Does that sound right? Can we add some owners to this? By we, I mean, I'm overcommitted, so.
Well, I can go take a look at the spreadsheet and assign, I can put a bullet for each of the SIGs that have charters that have people next to them and assign people that way. If assigning people in this the meeting notes doc works for you to track this. And then I need somebody to own we need somebody to own the like meta process on like, how do we close it, timeline, stuff like that.
I can own the meta process stuff if nobody else wants to.
Thank you, Michelle.
No problem.
What I would love to do with some of these things, as Michelle took that action item there, and this is my experience from the thing that's linked from here, can we give somebody like, you know, a reviewer for Michelle so that as she gets stuff done, that's the person that will say, okay, we've had enough discussion, let's just get this in there, because otherwise there seems to be a long tail of comments and these things are very difficult to manage.
I can be the reviewer for Michelle if that works.
Okay. I mean, we definitely want to get. Because we okay? Make forward progress on this stuff. It's so hard for the stuff to get stuck.
Just a quick meta, just to get a quick voice vote or whatever. Is everybody else okay with that proposal there? That Joe said basically we'll have one nominee reviewer. You get, I don't know, a week for comments or something like that, and then we'll just close it and go.
I would like for us to circle on that. Like we close it at the next meeting would be my only thing. So I would view the reviewer as the first pass. I would view you as the authoritative yes, no. I would hope.
Okay, but I don't want to see a situation where we're forced to bring it into the meeting, right? Like I'd prefer that people looked, like we can say, okay, you have till the next meeting to raise anything, but I'd prefer that we try to do it asynchronously on the review process.
I mean, maybe it's like, that's the person that calls last call, right? It's like, boom, last call, let's just get this thing in.
That works. And I'll call it on the mailing list or at the meeting. Okay.
Sounds good.
Wow. Did we come to a conclusion without having to be time boxed?
All right. We're trying. I'm trying because this stuff can get super frustrating.
This
All right,
is
the
nice.
voting rights stuff here. There's been, I know that Tim and Quinton, got a chance to meet and talk about this stuff some more. I missed out on that. Do you guys want to give your current snapshot? Because we missed out last meeting with quorum.
We went back and forth on a couple of different ideas, and we kind of went back to the original simplest idea was to just use dev stats, and you can get a rolled up dev stats across all of the different Kubernetes repos for GitHub events, and just drawing a cut bar line within that pretty much gives you a rough guess of people who are active in the community. And there will be some potential bad actors within that whole state space, but by and large, the signal to noise is higher there. So I think just by having that, without having to do a lot of people process, gives us a good measure of a group that we can say, they have voting rights within the community. It's about on the order of 600 people.
So we're separating this from any idea of SIG membership, which creates a certain level of cleanliness there. I think part of the proposal there was also to have a nominate, hey, I'm not on the list, but I think I should be, so that there is room for somebody to be to nominate themselves. And I think the other idea was that if we see somebody doing something stupid, like submitting like a gazillion PRs with the one-letter changes for spelling fixes, and we think that they're gaming the system, we also have the ability to sort of raise that issue if somebody brings that to our attention and say, nah, that doesn't count.
Yeah, I think the proposed process for exceptions was if you're not on the list and you think you should be, you get one of the SIGs to sponsor you and say, we think this person should get to vote with a brief explanation of why, what you do on that SIG. And then we would, vet that here, but should mostly be a rubber stamp process. If a SIG thinks you're legit and explains why, then you're good.
But issue and PR comments are counted in the dev stats?
Yeah, there's a general roll-up of GitHub events, which is everything. So
including emojis and everything, yeah.
Including everything, which
Betabot is like, man.
Betabot's excluded. Actually, anybody whose last name ends in bot is excluded.
Okay.
Yeah, and we had a quick look over the list. It looks pretty sane. Like most of the people at the top of the list look like they should be at the top of the list, and there's nobody who looks like they should be in the list or that we know of that should be in the list that were obviously absent. It seemed pretty reasonable.
So, like, what specific events? What specific threshold? You don't have to hash that out here, but what's ballpark?
All events threshold 100-ish.
Yeah. And that was in the order of 600 people.
Okay.
Over what time period?
1 year, since 1 year time window.
That includes emojis.
Does it?
Yep.
It does.
Yeah. Go frowny face everything, and you too can vote.
I think some of the thinking here also is that, like, do this for one election. Let's see how things work. Let's see if we think that things are distorted, and then like there's room to adjust.
Yeah, the worst case failure mode is actually really not that bad. We get like, is it 3 bad actors on the steering committee, which is not anywhere near enough to really cause big damage, and we go oops, and we dramatically overhaul it next time. But we're hoping that won't happen.
Sounds good.
I like it.
Can we see that written up for next time?
Yeah, I think Tim's done most of that already. We can just tidy it up and send it out.
Yeah, I'll make a PR for next time.
All right, who's going to be the last caller for Tim's PR?
I can.
All right.
Unless somebody else wants.
So in terms of last calls, my GitHub notification volume is unmanageable. Are we going to do last calls on the mailing list or something?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
All right, CNCF conformance group. There was the issue here in conversation on SIG testing shows that they are free running with, do you mean no proper feedback loop?
Yes.
Okay.
They weren't. So I guess the whole question was, the steering committee had okayed, because I remember we called a vote on it. The steering committee had okayed that the CNCF would, hire a bunch of folks. But what was not clear was what was the mandate by which they were given to execute, so that was clear to the community. So what had transpired was there was private communication between Dan and some folks at Google, and it was not clear how they were executing. And so what happened is a bunch of PRs showed up, and they showed up to SIG testing asking about it. And the handoff of what the expectations were about how folks were supposed to operate was clearly not articulated. So we had talked about it as a group within the steering committee that they would talk with SIGART about a test plan, and then once SIGART had okayed it, then they would basically go ahead and write the test, and SIG testing would validate and make sure that they're safe. So we as a group were okay with it, but there was some drop in handing off from when we had agreed to this to how the CNCF had appropriated folks and how they communicated expectations and whatnot. So I thought that was kind of odd, and it's worth raising to the steering committee.
Yeah, and I totally second that. I chatted at Dan with length until the fear appeared in his eyes. That I just using it as a model going forward. Maybe I didn't have the proposal in front of me or something that I think Jago or somebody authored that maybe described like what they were going to do. Because if so, then perhaps I missed the document that said, okay, first you contractors should create a test plan, and then you should run that test plan through SIG architecture to make sure you're actually testing the conformant things. And then you should go write some things up and work with folks in the testing commons subprojects, since they care about making sure tests are authored cleanly. And you should talk with the folks at SIG testing about how we're going to run these tests and block on them. Like that process didn't seem to, that was all news to them when I started articulating that at SIG testing. So I would have assumed that somebody would have owned that process going forward. And it was unclear to me whether or not like, okay, we got the money from CNCF and now it comes back to the steering committee to make sure it's executed on cleanly, or like what the next step should have been there. And this
sounds to me like we need a one person from either this group or SIG architecture who is the sponsor of this compliance program, given that it is compliance with Kubernetes. And that person can, I mean, there is a working group. These people get together, they discuss all these things, they do stuff there. I think it's just that none of us were present there, and now after the fact, we're concerned that they might not have done the right thing. So
it was back channeling. People just did a ton of back channeling to get things through.
It was, and like just to me, it seemed like there was no project manager. That's why, like, I want to use this as a template for, like, for example, if we put together a proposal to have automated checking of the licensing, and that was something that CNCF did. Like, I would want to make sure that they had somebody project managing that, and that was a plan that we agreed to and agreed with the execution of. And I don't know if I missed that plan when we were asking for the money.
I think.
What? Because I don't want us to be the bottleneck. That's the bottom line. Like, I'm cool as long as somebody gets it in handoff. That's the part that didn't seem to happen, is somebody who didn't have the knowledge to put together the plan got it, or there was no plan in the first place.
Yeah, I'll chase this down. And looking at the issue and the PRs, I can kind of tell who.
But like in my conversation with Dan, it seemed as though like he just talked directly to somebody. So
that's Dan's usual MO.
That's his usual style. So we got to make it clear so I made it clear, like, please don't ever do that again. That's the exact reason we have the steering committee, is to make sure this sort of stuff is done out in the open. But to me, as long as there's a document that reasonably describes what's supposed to happen, we don't really need to be involved as far as.
Yeah, so the way other conformance tests have been working is that I have given high-level direction about where we have coverage gaps, and people go off and write tests. If entirely new test infrastructure is developed, they're supposed to work with SIG testing on that. And then the actual tests that get written should go through the SIG to make sure they're functionally correct for whatever the functional area is. And it has to go to SIG architecture in order to actually get into the conformance suite, because the only people in that owner's file are Clayton and me.
Yeah, it was just in this sense. So in this specific scenario, they were coming to SIG testing asking us if the subject matter of the tests was appropriate to test the conformance of Kubernetes. And that's a discussion I feel like they should be having in SIG architecture with you.
You are correct.
And they should be having that before they ever write a line of code.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between sort of encouraging community members to fill in gaps versus, having this paid relationship with contractors that the CNCF's hiring.
Yeah, so I'll see if
I think also as a point of order, I think we should look at sort of why you and Clayton, by the way, because, I would expect maybe you and Jay, since you're both sort of, chairs of the committee, but.
Well, this is the chair versus tech lead thing.
I know, but I mean, just like in terms of conformance, like, Tim, Mr. St. Clair has been like super involved in conformance for quite a while, combined with the work around Sonovoice.
So the rationale originally was that we took a subset of the API approvers.
Yeah, but conformance is, okay, a different discussion. I think we can discuss that in SIG architecture, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the point of order here is about like process or lack thereof.
We can change the list of people, but because we didn't have a clear...
No, let's set that aside. That's just me getting off topic. I think the big question is that as the CNCF hires contractors, how do we make sure that they have good oversight?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that probably sort of pushing them through the same proposal process for any other kind of feature is probably the right way to go about it, right? And so SIG testing, having a plan of action processing testing is probably would have been the right thing here.
Yeah, I think somebody within, I think Mithra ended up getting it as a PM within Google. But to go back to the higher point of orders process here, did anybody else read the proposal for why we're using this money? Did it elaborate?
Was this the coverage? Was this just the coverage, like API coverage testing proposal, yes. Or is it something? Yeah.
No.
So I had talked.
No. This was more Brennan.
Oh, okay, because I had talked to Dan about that. So, but
maybe it was that. Could you elaborate on what you saw there?
We were talking about basically building a proxy that would sit between the API server and the test infrastructure that we had and would measure effectively coverage on a Swagger spec.
Right. Yeah. So that's something I've seen demos of something like that from folks at SIG testing, and I think they're funded by CNCF. I'm not sure. But again, it was unclear to me, who's sitting here saying, in order to most effectively prioritize what tests or APIs, what tests need to be written, what APIs need to be covered, we need an API proxy thing. And then based on that, we're going to send these people. I just didn't see anybody all that together.
So specifically, I had those conversations with Dan at one point where I said, hey, I've wanted to build this thing for forever. And he, I think that was the impetus of it. I don't think it was ever I didn't say, hey, you should go hire somebody to do this. It was more like he was looking for projects to hire people for. But I agree that there's no process, right? I think in general, this is true for the money, right? There's no process for prioritizing what we spend that money on.
I see.
So
I think one of the places where this fell down in my mind is that I talked to that person and I proposed the alternative instead of a proxy. As I was talking to him, it occurred to me that we can use the audit log as a way to actually look to see what's being called.
Which I think someone else also did.
Well, the trouble with the audit log is you don't get the body.
Meta, Brandon, is that we didn't have clear goals set out, so we couldn't actually figure out whether the audit log or the proxy were the right solution for the problem we were trying to do because we didn't have a proposal process in place here.
I would like to hear from Michelle, who said she had.
Oh, are you?
I think. No.
I'm gonna let this continue.
Okay.
And then I want to come back to the beginning and kind of, from a high level, take it from the inception to what happened and kind of map that again.
I think we beat the horse here. Everybody's had their say. So why don't you go ahead, Michelle?
Okay. Yeah. So I read a proposal. I think I talked to Jaco and I read a proposal. Aaron, you were in that conversation. We talked through how it would all work. And we're like, yeah, that sounds sane. And then we brought it to I think I talked to the steering committee about it. briangrant gave us some context. We're like, that sounds good. We got this money, or we got approval to get this money. And then I had no idea that people were hired. So when people were hired, Brian, were you told, like, was SIG architecture told? I missed that
Not
part.
specifically, but before you got funding, they already had the contractors identified.
That's true.
So I didn't know that they were starting, but I knew the people had already been identified.
Gotcha.
That was one of the arguments for the urgency, is that, you know, we don't want to wait for those people might get hired to do something else, and then they won't be available, and then we'll have to wait even longer.
Oh, gotcha.
But yeah, I was not aware what they had started working on or when they had started working.
Okay.
So I do remember being in that discussion with you and Jago, and he had mentioned that there was a proposal, but I hadn't seen it. And it was unclear to me whether, like as a process going forward, if a proposal of that nature should be floated through the steering committee, or if that's making us a bottleneck.
I was under the impression that that proposal was floated through SIG architecture, but in the future, yeah, I think that it doesn't hurt to pass that through the steering committee.
There may have been a link shared with the steering committee, but I probably, you know, there was discussion about it, but it was high level. But the proposal was also high level. Right? The proposal was along the lines of, we have evidence, we have data that shows there are massive coverage gaps. We think we can contract people to fill some of those gaps, but they asked for a rule that the project would require people developing new APIs to actually implement appropriate conformance tests. So we would not be in a hole, we would not be digging a deeper hole, at least. And then, like, money was allocated with the expectation that the details about specific coverage gaps to be filled would be worked out as they developed tools to get better information about what the actual gaps were, like the proxy or whatever. So I had suggested that be the first order of business. I was aware that data was collected using the audit logs, which I don't know if anything's happened with respect to the proxy.
That's all ongoing, but I don't want us to dive back down there. I really like staying up here. So I feel like what I wanted out of this, before I would want to send money through, or at least as a confirmation, once we had an approval to move forward on a project, I'd want to see something that laid out like who was owning it as manager or whatever, person shepherding it, steering it. And I would want to see which SIGs were involved, because I would hope as much as possible that this work would be done out in the open and through the appropriate SIGs that have ownership or authority in those areas. And I just don't feel like I got that with this particular case.
My impression was that it was supposed to be, you know, as far as like any new coverage measurement or test infrastructure, that was supposed to be discussed in SIG testing.
Like the implementation of it, sure, but right, the whole idea of like you want to make sure the tests for the workload stuff are run through SIG apps, because those are the domain experts in that specific area. Like I think that's really what I'm interested in as a steering committee member, is not the specific technical details, but just making sure that we're routing the right work to the right SIGs.
Yeah, it's basically like if we're going to hire people, make sure they have well-defined tasks and how to execute. Otherwise, it's just kind of random chaos, right? Like, and that's kind of what we're having, is random chaos. So I think if we're going to spend this kind of money, and we should have the due diligence, or have insight into enforcing the due diligence of some sort of process, right? Because it seems like we just said, like, you know, money, random things happened, and then all of a sudden a bunch of questions, right? That's what happened afterwards. So there was clear lead up. The lead up was fairly clean, but then once the hiring of these folks had occurred, then it was, I don't know what happened.
In the process, just to go back to the process of like leading up to getting the money. So that request for money, should that be talked about in the relevant SIGs as well? Like before we actually get the money, should the request be talked about with the people involved, with the groups involved, or should it be talked about after the money is allocated, or both?
I think as long as there's a plan, right? Some kind of plan as part of the, you know, having, if we're going to say we're going to hire these people, we need to have some type of plan that when we hire them, they can, you know, we're contracting them for this reason. Here you go. This is how you execute.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be like voluntolding a SIG, like, hey, you must now go work on this. It's more like, hey, guess what? You now have 4 people dedicated full time to working on this task. Do you mind making sure they're doing the right thing?
That makes sense.
Are there any action items out of this? Or is this just buyer beware or like word to the wise for the next time?
I'm going to chase down with, so I think Mitra has been interacting with the contractors to some degree and had sent out a doc. I'm not exactly sure to which groups. I thought it was SIG testing. With some high level, I wouldn't say details, but sort of high level about what they're doing. And I see she commented on the issue that links to the PRs that are underway. So I'll try to get state from Mitra and convey some of the things we talked about here in terms of process.
Do we want to require some sort of checkpointing where we actually evaluate how these contractors are doing over time against a plan? I mean, how formal of a process do we want to actually get here?
Well, I think if they're going totally in the wrong direction, we can reset them. If they seem to be going in the right direction, then putting some kind of guidance and process into place where we make sure that this stuff is getting routed to the right SIGs. Looking at one of the first issues they created was a test for namespaces. It's probably not even obvious to them which SIG that is. And definitely part of the challenge is that Mitra is new to the project, so a lot of this may not often be on her. But let me figure out what's going on a little bit, and then we can figure out what.
I'm just trying to like, can we extract some lessons out of this? Because like if you were at a big company or a company at all, and you were going to hire a contractor to do something, there would be an owner on the company's side, and they would be the one on the line to actually make sure that that contractor was useful, and they would actually.
I think there is an owner, just the owner is not, maybe doesn't fully understand the expectations.
Yeah, like Joe, I do kind of longer term want that more formal process or document or checklist we would go through going forward. I just don't think we have any other proposals in front of us right now. So I feel like we're all on the same page and we've reached the buyer beware state. At some point, it would be a good thing to do, but I think we're all kind of full.
Yeah, just as a contrast, so the previous things that we allocated money for, the DevStats effort, they worked pretty closely with me and with Garrett. And we basically got daily updates of the dashboard, and it was developed. There was an initial doc where we fleshed out some level of detail what data we thought we wanted, and then we found when we actually saw graphs that the data was bogus or that it wasn't actually useful or whatever, and then we iteratively refined from there. But there was a close feedback loop with people who actually knew something about what was actually needed. And the other case was the editor for the docs, and they got embedded into SIG docs, and that seemed to work pretty well. But they're also, like they actually knew what they needed, and there was a tight feedback loop. So that seems to be what's missing here is both and being driven by someone who actually knows what's needed.
And I think some accountability up through this group would be useful at some point too. All right.
Yeah, so I really don't want to be in the business of PMing this, right? Like I think that I think the right accountability is to say we're not going to fund anything without a SIG sponsor.
Well, but I mean, then that SIG ends up PMing it, right? I mean, like,
and that's okay, right? Because in theory, it's doing benefit to the SIG, and so like if the SIG doesn't want to PM it, then that's a pretty good indicator that it's probably not worth funding.
Well, so like I said, in this case, I think there is someone who is involved in a SIG who is actually doing it, but that person just doesn't fully know what was expected.
All right. Okay. Correct. Time box that we've already went over because I lost track of the clock. Michelle, Code of Conduct Committee doc. You have 4 minutes. I'm so sorry.
No problem. I just wanted to make an announcement. There is a code of conduct committee outline for how to move forward with that, what the objectives would be, and how that would go about. And yeah, several people have started commenting already, so I really appreciate that. If you haven't seen it, check it out. That's it.
There's also a working doc to improve the actual code of conduct. It was started on the CNCF side, and I'm kind of driving it. A number of you who expressed interest in participating, the doc has been shared with you. I could share it with other people, but really, if you expect to work on it, I will share it with you. Otherwise, it's not really fully public yet. At this point, we're just like collecting the issues and trying to figure out what the shape of what is needed.
All right, and then the idea is that we'll keep that private for a little bit yet while we, have a safe space to iterate on this stuff before we go more public in terms of what the shape of the committee looks like. Is that the idea? All right.
Yeah.
All right, we have 3 minutes. Do we want to continue arguing about the conformance stuff?
Please no, please no.
I got one last thing real quick with the time remaining. Just to give you all a heads up that I am dropping off the face of the Kubernetes earth for a couple weeks upcoming. Now that I've assigned you all action items, my last day with Samsung is Friday, and then I'm taking a couple weeks to recoup and recharge. I will be back, but if there's anything I need to handle urgently, please get in contact with me over the next 2 days. Otherwise, I'll be checking email and other forms of communication sporadically, but I'm going to try as much as I can not to be around. Just figured I wanted to tell you all to your virtual faces, since I've enjoyed working with you so much, and I'm going to miss you all for a little while, but I will be back soon.
Dude, it's 2 weeks. Just go.
I think you'll be fine.
Tim Hawking,
right.
do you have 5 minutes at the end of the meeting? Just to, I think we've been talking past each other a little bit, so we can fix that in 2 minutes, if you have 2 minutes.
Although I have to run.
Brian has to run. He's my Zoom link, and I can't get Zoom to work on my laptop right now. We can switch to Hangouts or something.
Yeah, anything is fine.
Is that for the other thing? Because I added it to the agenda for SIGARC.
No, it's not anything to do with SIG architecture or SIG anything. It's me and Tim.
All right,
Well,
I'll see you guys later, and I'll let you and Tim find a way.
Okay.
And I'm gonna.
Quinton, you wanna hang out to me real quick?
Sure. I will send you an invite. How about that?
Roger.
Cool.
Thanks.
Bye all.